It is the year 1274. You are standing on a dark rock on the coast of Hakata in the north of Kyushu Island, and what your eyes see before you doesn't seem real. The sea is covered with ships. Not 2, not 10, not 50. There are 900 vessels advancing in tight formation, slicing through the dark waters of the Sea of Japan with a precision that makes the ground seem to tremble even before any battle has begun. Inside those wooden hulls are 40,000 soldiers, Mongols, Koreans, and Chinese, gathered under a single banner, that of the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. An empire that had already conquered China, subjugated Persia, devastated Russia, and made emperors tremble on their thrones. And now it has come here to Japan. The question that will echo through every part of this story is simple, but the answer will deeply surprise you. How did an isolated archipelago ruled by medieval warriors with curved swords manage to resist the most powerful army in history? Before answering, you need to understand what was at stake. Kublai Khan was not an impulsive conqueror. He was methodical, patient, and intelligent. Before sending the first ships, he spent years trying to bend Japan through diplomacy. He sent messengers with formal letters demanding submission. The tone was clear: surrender, pay tribute, or suffer the consequences. The letters arrived. The Japanese government, controlled by the Hojo clan in Kamakura, read every word. And then they did something that few in the world would dare to do. They completely ignored it. They did not reply. They simply remained silent. For Kublai Khan, this was an unbearable provocation. So he sent the ships. You have to imagine what it was like to be a samurai warrior at that moment. You grew up within a code, Bushido, a set of unwritten values about honor, loyalty, and single combat. When two armies met on the battlefield, there was a ritual. You would introduce yourself, declare your lineage, your name, your deeds. You would challenge a specific enemy, and the two would fight. It was almost a dance, a sacred theater of violence. Now imagine that this theater meets a hurricane. When the Mongol troops landed at Hakata, they did not come to duel. They came to annihilate. They advanced in tight formations, shield against shield, with drums that were more than music. They were communication. Each drumbeat pattern was a command: advance, retreat, encircle, flank. It was an army that operated like a machine, and the samurai who went out to meet them were immediately disoriented. A samurai stepped forward, as tradition dictated, and began shouting his name and lineage. No one on the Mongol side stopped to listen. The archers fired in unison. The formations closed in, and the samurai, with all his code of honor before him, was simply swept from the field. There was no room for rituals in that war. There was only a cold logic: survive or advance. The Japanese retreated. In that first invasion, they lost ground quickly. The Mongol weapons were unlike anything the samurai had ever seen. There were clay bombs filled with gunpowder that exploded into fragments, a technology Japan simply did not possess. There were poisoned arrows, launched in dense clouds even before physical contact. Distance killed before any sword could respond, but then something happened. On the night of that first day of combat, when the Mongols retreated to their ships to reorganize their forces, a storm descended upon Hakata Bay. Not a breeze, not ordinary rain. A furious tempest that capsized ships, drowned soldiers, and forced the fleet to retreat to the Korean coast before the invasion could be completed. The Japanese survived, but no one knew that this was only a pause. Kublai Khan would not give up. 7 years pass. It is now 1281, and all of Japan knows they will return. It's not a guess, it's a certainty. Kublai Khan sent new envoys after the first failed invasion, once again demanding submission. This time, the Japanese government did not simply ignore them. They did something more dramatic, more definitive, more laden with symbolism. They beheaded the envoys, cut off the heads of the diplomatic representatives of the world's greatest empire, and sent the bodies back. It was a declaration of war with no room for interpretation. On the other side of the sea, Kublai Khan responded on a scale the world had rarely seen. This time it would not be 40,000 men. It would be 140,000 soldiers divided into two separate fleets that were to join forces on the coast of Japan for the final blow. The Eastern Fleet departing from Korea with 45,000 warriors. The Southern Fleet departing from southern China with 100,000 soldiers and an armada of 3,500 ships. Together, they would form the largest amphibious operation in medieval history. And the Japanese knew all of this. Here is what most people don't know, and it's exactly where the story begins to reveal its most surprising layer. The samurai used the 7-year interval to transform themselves. They didn't just sit and wait. The Hojo clan, which controlled Japan's military government, ordered the construction of something that seemed simple but was brilliant in its logic. A stone wall along the entire Hakata Bay, the very spot where the Mongols had landed during the first invasion. A low wall, less than 2 meters high in many sections, built along 20 kilometers of coastline. Stone upon stone, raised by peasants, artisans, and laborers who had never held a sword. Why would such a low wall work against an army of 140,000 men? Because it wasn't built to stop the army. It was built to stop the horses. The Mongols were devastating on open ground, mainly because of their cavalry. Fast horsemen, mounted archers who could shoot accurately while on the move. That was the backbone of Mongol power. But horses don't easily jump over stone walls, especially under a hail of arrows. The wall would force the invaders to dismount, to reorganize, to lose the speed that was their greatest advantage. It was an elegant solution to a daunting problem, but the samurai didn't stop there. They also changed themselves. Those warriors who, during the first invasion, went out into the field shouting their names and expecting individual duels, learned a painful lesson. That world no longer existed in this war, so they adapted. They began to organize squads, they started using formations. They began to understand that individual honor still mattered, but that surviving as a group was what would allow for any honor in the future. There was also an offensive strategy that no one expected from the Japanese: nighttime attacks on enemy ships. Small boats would silently set out into the darkness, rowed by warriors who knew that the Mongol advantage disappeared in the cramped spaces between decks. On a ship, there is no cavalry, no formations of 1,000 men. There are narrow corridors, darkness, and the edge of the sword. In these attacks, the samurai regained something that open fields had taken from them: the intimacy of single combat, where individual training made all the difference. When the two Mongol fleets finally arrived in Japan in the summer of 1281, they encountered resistance unlike anything they had expected. The Eastern Fleet arrived first, in June. It tried to land at Hakata and came face to face with the wall. The first contingents managed to reach the shore, but the wall held back their advance. The Japanese defended every meter with ferocity. It was no longer the chaos of the first invasion. It was organized, calculated resistance, and the Mongols began to suffer casualties without being able to break through the line. Weeks went by. The Southern Fleet was delayed. The 100,000 soldiers, who should have arrived in May, didn't make it until August. Meanwhile, the two Mongol forces remained anchored in the bay, waiting, consuming supplies, exposed to the heat of the Japanese summer. Disease began to spread among the crowded ships. Morale started to give way. And now you need to feel what happened next. It is August 12th, 1281. The sky over Kyushu begins to change color in a way the Japanese recognize, but the Mongols have never seen. The air grows heavy, hot, and humid in a way that isn't just ordinary heat. It's pressure. It's the electric silence that comes before something immense. It's a typhoon, not an ordinary storm. One of the largest typhoons ever recorded in that region's history, a system that arrived with winds strong enough to flip ships as if they were leaves in a basin. The Mongol fleet was anchored in tight formation, ships lined up and tied to each other to withstand smaller waves. But that decision, made to provide stability in rough seas, turned into a deadly trap in the typhoon. One ship crashed into another, chains snapped, masts fell, and Hakata Bay, which had received 140,000 invaders, turned into a floating graveyard. It is estimated that between 60,000 and 90,000 soldiers died during those 2 days of storm. The survivors who made it to shore were captured or killed by the samurai waiting on the beach. What was left of the greatest naval force in medieval history was destroyed not by a decisive battle, but by the ocean itself. The Japanese looked at this and saw the hand of the gods. They called the typhoon kamikaze. Divine wind. It's tempting to end the story here and leave the beautiful image as it is. The divine wind, the gods protecting Japan, the victorious samurai on the beach while the wreckage of enemy ships sinks to the bottom of the sea. It's a perfect narrative, and for centuries, that's exactly how Japan told this story to itself. But the truth is more complex, more human, and in a way, more impressive than the myth. The typhoon did not save an unprepared Japan. It saved a Japan that had done absolutely everything within its power to survive. And that distinction matters deeply. Think about the 7 years between the two invasions. Think about the anonymous workers who raised stone by stone along 20 kilometers of coastline without knowing if it would be enough. Think about the samurai who had the rare humility to recognize that their code of combat needed to change, that the tradition they revered had to bend before a new reality. Think about the small boat pilots who went out into the darkness to attack immense fleets with nothing but courage and their knowledge of the sea. When the typhoon arrived, it did not find a people waiting for a miracle. It found a people who had exhausted all their human options and, by chance of nature or the will of heaven, were given one last chance. But here is the part that the romantic version of history often leaves out. Victory came at a devastating cost. The years of preparation for the second invasion had drained Japan. The Hojo government had summoned clans from across the archipelago to contribute troops, resources, and labor. Warriors who had come from distant regions expected, after victory, to receive land and rewards, the traditional payment for military service. But the government had no conquered lands to distribute. There was no war booty. Victory against the Mongols had produced no wealth, only survival. Clans who had bled for the defense of Japan returned home with nothing. This deep resentment, this sense of unrecognized sacrifice, planted seeds of instability that would blossom in the decades to come. The very system that had organized the resistance began to fragment from within. Japan survived the external enemy and was slowly corroded by the internal tension that victory left behind. History rarely delivers clean victories. Kublai Khan, on the other side of the sea, never accepted defeat. He planned a third invasion, but the costs of the previous two, combined with rebellions within his own empire and the difficulties of maintaining a territory that stretched from China to Europe, gradually consumed his ability to act. The third invasion never left the drawing board. Kublai Khan died in 1294, never having subdued Japan, the only territory in East Asia that the Mongol Empire was never able to conquer. Now you might be wondering, what does this story, which happened more than 700 years ago, have to say to the present? More than it seems at first glance. There is a lesson about adaptation that transcends any era. The samurai who survived the first invasion could have done what many civilizations do in the face of defeat: glorify the past, insist on old methods, refuse to change out of attachment to their identity. There was the full weight of a culture, a code of honor, centuries of tradition, all saying that the right way to fight was the way it had always been done. They chose differently. They kept the essence, the courage, the discipline, the commitment to defense, and changed the form. They built walls where there had once been open fields. They organized squads where there had once been duels. They learned the enemy's language without needing to speak a single word of it. They understood how he thought, how he moved, where he was vulnerable, and used that knowledge coldly. This is adaptive intelligence, and it emerges whenever human groups face pressures that their usual methods cannot solve. It appears in communities that, for centuries, lived off a resource and had to reinvent their economy when it ran out. It appears in farmers who learn new techniques, not out of enthusiasm for novelty, but out of the sheer necessity to keep existing. It appears in anyone who has ever faced a problem bigger than themselves and had to choose between breaking or transforming. The divine wind was real. The storm existed. But what the typhoon encountered was an archipelago that had decided, collectively and without any guarantee of success, to do everything within its power before relying on any force beyond the human. And perhaps this is the most honest lesson that this story carries. Miracles, when they appear, tend to come to those who have already exhausted everything they could do on their own. The sea that swallowed 140,000 invaders still exists. The coast of Hakata still exists. And in the depths of the bay, archaeologists continue to find the wreckage of that armada. Anchors, swords, bones, fragments of clay bombs that exploded 700 years ago. Each piece found is a reminder that it really happened, that it wasn't a myth, that it wasn't a legend. It was choice, it was effort, it was adaptation, and in the end, it was survival. If this story surprised you in any way, let us know in the comments which part caught you most off guard. Was it the stone wall, the nighttime attacks, or the silent cost of victory that no one talks about? Like the video if you made it this far, because that helps this channel keep bringing you stories that school never taught. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. And while the next video loads, go check out how the Vikings sailed to America 500 years before Columbus. You'll understand why that story was also buried for so long.